This is the Global News Podcast from the BBC World Service. Hello, I'm Ankur Desai, and in the early hours of Wednesday, the 6th of May, these are our main stories. President Trump is pausing efforts to help ships get through the Strait of Hormuz amid what he called great progress towards a peace agreement with Iran. President Zelensky has condemned the latest Russian attacks on Ukraine, which left more than 20 people dead. Spain says it'll let a cruise ship hit by an outbreak of hantavirus travel to the Canary Islands, following a request from the World Health Organization. Also coming up in this podcast, a US state takes action against the practice of charging people for products based on their personal data.
Today, Maryland becomes the first state in the country to ban price manipulation in supermarkets and grocery stores all across the state of Maryland.
We'll explain how surveillance pricing works and why it's controversial. Let's start with the latest on the situation in and around the Persian Gulf. President Trump's announced that he's halting the US military operation to escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz. Writing on Truth Social, Mr. Trump said so-called Project Freedom would be paused for a short period of time to see whether or not an agreement with the Iranians could be finalized and signed. Speaking beforehand at the Oval Office, he insisted the US still had the upper hand.
Iran wants to make a deal. They play games, but let me just tell you, they want to make a deal. And who wouldn't? When your military is totally gone, we could do anything we want to them. Who wouldn't?
However, the Iranian Speaker of Parliament said on Tuesday that the blocking of the Strait of Hormuz was intolerable for the US and warned that Iran hadn't even started yet. For more assessment on the current state of the conflict, I spoke to our Middle East analyst, Sebastian Usher.
What we've been hearing from the US is an effort to reframe the conflict. So to say that this is no longer an offensive conflict with Iran, it's now defensive. With that is still, of course, the threat of the big stick militarily that America carries behind all this. And the same story, essentially, of the Americans saying to the Iranians, look, you're just bluffing. You've got nothing here. Come to the table, accept the conditions, wave the white flag, was what President Trump said today.
But it doesn't seem the Iranians are willing to give up. They haven't seemed to have shown any signs of that throughout this conflict. And they're quite aggressive with their tone. They talk about the fact that they're just getting started, whilst the Americans are talking about the fact that they have control of the strait. Who's right? Who is bluffing? Because it feels like a bluff after a double bluff all the time.
You don't know. I mean, it's still a game of bluff where the cards haven't been called in yet completely. They could both be making serious miscalculations about the hands that they hold. The Iranians believe this is a game at the moment where hunkering down is what matters most, and that's what they're good at. They can hunker down, they think, for as long as is necessary. They can take the economic, they can take the military beating, and that they'll see the Americans off by doing so. President Trump is losing patience over this process. He's not in it for the long kind of economic attritional war. That's where America is weakest. But if the Americans were able to remove this absolute key card that they have, which is control of the Strait of Hormuz, then that would radically alter the equilibrium between the two sides, and it would suddenly put Iran much more exposed. I also think the Iranian leadership, I mean, in a sense, war is not their worst outcome. As long as the war goes on, they don't have to face up, the really serious economic, social issues that they have with their own people. I think there's going to be a reckoning if this is over. And in many ways, this leadership, which is now essentially a military leadership, is more comfortable with this.
Sebastian Usher reporting. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz has caused the most severe energy crisis in decades. Much of the impact has been felt in the Asia-Pacific region, which is heavily reliant on oil supplies from the Gulf. Thailand has today approved a $12 billion emergency borrowing package, while Australia has announced it will establish a 1 billion litre national fuel stockpile. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is set to visit Beijing on Wednesday for talks with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi. It's seen as a sign that China may play a role in any US deal with Iran. The meeting comes just a week before a highly anticipated summit between President Trump and Xi Jinping. The US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, told reporters that he wants China to be firm with Iran.
I hope the Chinese tell him what he needs to be told, and that is that what you are doing in the Straits is causing you to be globally isolated. You're the bad guy in this. You guys should not be blowing up ships. You should not be putting mines. You should not be trying to hold hostage the global economy. I hope the Chinese bring, whether it's done privately, but I hope it's done directly, that's the message they deliver to them. China is an export-driven economy. That means they depend on other countries to buy from them. Well, you can't buy from them if you can't ship it there, and you can't buy from them if your economy is being destroyed by what Iran is doing.
Our correspondent in Beijing, Stephen McDonald, told me more.
It's very interesting. We're waiting for the readout to come because they've already started having their meeting or meetings. And the readout, of course, will give us the various governments' perspectives on the meeting, or at least what they publicly can say about it. But the fascinating thing is, why do it face-to-face? Wang Yi and Abbas Araghchi have already spoken several times on the phone since the war started. So why has Iran's foreign minister come here now for this face-to-face meeting? Most observers would say it can't be a coincidence that it's the week before Donald Trump arrives in Beijing. So it could be that the Chinese government wants to be able to present itself to Donald Trump and his administration as a good actor in this, and that Beijing can say, look, we're trying to bring about a negotiated solution. We heard Marco Rubio saying that what the US wants China to do is essentially read the Riot Act to Iran and say, you're isolated because you're blocking the Strait of Hormuz. China isn't going to do that because although the Chinese government wants that strait unblocked, it doesn't blame Iran for it. The Chinese government says all parties need to sit down and discuss this, including those who started the war, namely the US and Israel. I think it's just showing that this is laying the groundwork for these discussions next week between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump. I mean, we had Scott Bessent from the Trump administration also saying that this is going to be high up on the agenda. Beijing does see itself now as something of a broker at times. For example, when it did a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, bringing those former enemies together. And of course, like everyone else, the Chinese economy is being hit by the war. So I think it all points to China encouraging Iran to be part of the negotiations. Now, of course, the problem is that getting both sides to agree. But from a Chinese perspective, talking is better than shooting, and that's what they'd be hoping will come of these discussions.
Stephen McDonald reporting from Beijing. 4 weeks ago, on the 8th of April, Israel launched a wave of strikes against Lebanon, hitting 100 targets in 10 minutes. Lebanese authorities say that more than 300 people, among them children, were killed on what has become known as Black Wednesday. Israel says it was targeting Hezbollah, the Lebanese militia backed by Iran, which has launched multiple attacks against Israel. The BBC's senior investigations correspondent, Nawal Al-Maghafi, has been piecing together what happened on one of Lebanon's deadliest days in many years.
In Hayy al-Silom, a neighborhood in Lahia where Hezbollah holds sway in Beirut's southern suburbs, the debris is overwhelming. Huge blocks of concrete and twisted metal are piled several stories high. Excavators are parked nearby. The people here are still picking up the pieces.
Be careful with the wires, they might have electricity.
Mohammed Khairuddin is showing me what's left of his home. The staircase leading to his third-floor apartment is only just accessible. One side of the building has completely fallen away. 3 floors collapsed down onto his apartment, killing his son, Abbas.
This is the second home I have lost. I wish it was just my home and that my son survived. This brick can be rebuilt, but nothing will bring my son back.
Following the death of his son, Mohammed expressed his sympathies for Hezbollah, asking it to defend Lebanon in an interview with local media. That's a sentiment echoed by many people we spoke to in areas that have been consistently attacked by Israel.
This is a poor very densely populated neighborhood. I mean, you can see how close all these buildings are to each other. And it's also the site of the highest number of fatalities in that 10 minutes that rocked Lebanon. At least 80 people died here in this neighborhood alone.
From Hermel in the north, across the Bekaa Valley, to further south in cities like Sidon, 100 bombs fell across Lebanon in just 10 minutes on April 8th. Corniche al-Mazraa is one of Beirut's busiest arteries. Noha owns a gym here, and she's coming back for the first time.
Inshallah, everything will be fixed.
Just like everyone else in Corniche al-Mazraa, Noha never expected this area to be hit. She recorded the chaos that followed on her phone. Our analysis of social media videos shows that an Israeli strike hit the top floor of a neighboring apartment block. Then, moments later, 2 bombs hit a warehouse directly behind Noha's building, causing a huge explosion and extensive damage to the surrounding area. The Israeli military say it was targeting Hezbollah command centers and military infrastructure that day, but it didn't specify who or what the target was in Corniche al-Mazraa. When asked what steps were taken to protect civilians, it said it made extensive efforts to mitigate harm to uninvolved individuals. I asked Noha what she thinks was the target near her gym.
The target was civilians. Certainly a civilian target. Who died, who was injured, and who was hurt? We were. Me and my friends and my neighbors.
16 people were killed in Corniche al-Mazraa.
Why can't we live a life like the rest of the world? Why? Because Lebanon is beautiful and they want it. They don't have a right to it. Lebanon is beautiful and it is ours. They cannot strike it because they want it.
Israel said it killed 250 Hezbollah operatives in the attack. Lebanon's health ministry disputes this. It told us that the majority of the 361 people killed that day were civilians. 100 bombs in 10 minutes. It was one of Lebanon's deadliest days in decades.
That report from Nawal al-Maghafi. A truce declared by Ukraine in the war with Russia has officially begun, but in the hours leading up to it, at least 22 people were killed in Russian strikes across 3 Ukrainian cities. The temporary halt in hostilities is designed to mirror a separate Russian ceasefire due to begin on Friday, ahead of the annual commemoration of the Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany. Vitaly Shevchenko, our chief analyst at BBC Monitoring, told me more about these strikes.
They were pretty bad. It was an evening of relentless strikes across Ukraine, targeting key regional centres. And Volodymyr Zelensky, he issued a statement calling the glide bomb strike on Zaporizhia a terrorist strike. That's the wording he used. And he said it was devoid of military sense.
Now, there are effectively 2 ceasefires happening simultaneously. What do Russia and Ukraine, I guess, respectively, get out of it?
For Russia, the main objective is being able to hold this crucial Victory Day parade on Red Square on Saturday, after Volodymyr Zelensky hinted or threatened that he could dispatch drones to Moscow on the day and disrupt the parade. The military in Russia said that if you do that, we will hit central Kyiv pretty badly. So that event is absolutely crucial for Russia's state ideology. Vladimir Putin really does not want it to be disrupted. Now, for Ukraine, for Volodymyr Zelensky, announcing a rival ceasefire, if you like, is a way of taking the initiative from Russia and removing the pressure to either follow Russia's suit and essentially accept Russia's conditions, or look uncooperative and unwilling to compromise. So what Ukraine said, we don't need a ceasefire that lasts mere couple of days. We want an open-ended ceasefire, and let's see what happens. But I would be really surprised if Russia followed Volodymyr Zelensky's suit and stopped attacking Ukraine.
Now, with this aggression, I guess, is this likely to have any impact on long-term efforts to end the war?
It's nothing new, really. All it does is highlights how much hatred, how much distrust there is between Russia and Ukraine. Of course, for different reasons, both Russia and Ukraine are willing and able to continue fighting. What Russia showed by carrying out these massive strikes across Ukraine is that it's completely and utterly determined to continue attacking key cities across Ukraine, regardless of how many civilians die. Russia is as relentless as it was, and that leaves Volodymyr Zelensky in the pretty tricky situation. He wants to look willing to compromise and find a way of halting, if not ceasing hostilities. But when scores of people die, of course, he will be thinking, okay, what's in it for me? We need to respond.
Our chief analyst at BBC Monitoring, Vitaly Shevchenko. Still to come in this podcast, have you heard of the WhatsApp whistling craze? We will reveal all. This is the Global News Podcast. The stricken cruise ship on which 3 people have died of hantavirus is to set sail for the Canary Islands, where everyone on board will be medically examined and cared for before being transferred home to their own countries. The Spanish government says it has a moral and legal obligation to help. The vessel is currently anchored off the coast of Cape Verde in West Africa and hasn't been allowed into port. Specialist planes are being sent to Cape Verde to evacuate 3 people from on board the ship. 2 of them are said to require urgent medical care. The BBC managed to get through to one passenger on board, a Jordanian travel vlogger called Kassem Hatto. One of our producers read out what he told us.
The situation on the ship has been very calm. People are taking the situation seriously, but without any panic, trying to keep social distancing and wearing masks to be safe. The leadership and captain on the ship are keeping us informed whenever they have new information. We are not obliged to do anything, but we're trying to follow the recommendations we received of limiting close contact with other passengers and sanitising our hands as much as possible. Our days have been close to normal, just waiting for authorities to find a solution, but morale on the ship is high and we're keeping ourselves busy with reading, watching movies, having hot drinks and that kind of thing. While it was really unfortunate losing some of our colleagues in this journey, from my point of view being on the ship, this story has been blown out of proportion. The situation is still unclear and we have to wait for more information to draw conclusions. Our hearts are with those who passed away and their families, and we wish a speedy recovery to the sick people on board.
The World Health Organization says it is continuing work to identify the strain and now believe it's possible the virus is spreading human to human. Our Southern Africa correspondent, Pumza Filani, has been following developments.
Scientists in South Africa are leading efforts to help identify the strain of hantavirus which has hit passengers on the MV Hondius. The WHO has told us that it is now considering the possibility of human-to-human infection, which is rare, between passengers who've been in close contact on the ship. Tarek Yashagovich of the WHO explains.
We are doing sequencing of the virus to understand better what hantavirus we are really dealing with here, because hantavirus is a group of viruses, and some of them, those who are circulating in South America, can really produce a severe cardiopulmonary syndrome that can lead to fatal outcomes.
The WHO has also said it was trying to trace passengers who were on board a flight from St. Helena to Johannesburg on the 25th of April who may have come into close contact with a Dutch woman who later died in a hospital here in South Africa. She's the wife of the first passenger who died on the ship in early April. She'd travelled to South Africa to receive his remains and travel back home to the Netherlands when she became ill on arrival at the airport, officials told the BBC.
Our Southern Africa correspondent Bumza Filani reporting. Now imagine going into a grocery store and paying $2 for a bottle of milk, but the person before you paid less or maybe more. It might sound unfair, but it's a real practice known as surveillance pricing, where prices are set based on personal data, such as someone's household size or shopping habits. Now, Maryland has become the first US state to ban this form of pricing in grocery stores and some other businesses. Here's the BBC's Ira Khan.
Surveillance pricing is a form of dynamic pricing, like when airlines, hotels, taxi companies, they adjust their prices because of demand, time of day, or weather. But the way that it's different is that it's a practice of when a company sets the price of a product based on the personal data of that particular consumer. That data can be the way the customer shops, their location, their household size. Even though companies have always been free to set prices based on their own costs and on markets, surveillance pricing is all about charging the maximum price that a particular individual might be willing to pay. And by charging customers this maximum price, they're able to make huge profits. So the governor of the state of Maryland has signed into law the Protection from Predatory Pricing Act. This is what he said at the signing.
Today, Maryland becomes the first state in the country to ban price manipulation in supermarkets and grocery stores all across the state of Maryland. Because people deserve to know that the prices on the shelf is actually the price they're going to pay for when they get to the checking count. People deserve to know that the price that they pay is not different from the customer who walked in just before them. And today, Maryland is putting an end to any forms of price manipulation.
So under this new law, grocery retailers in Maryland will be prohibited from using surveillance data to set individual prices. The law also requires that prices will be fixed for at least one business day. And what that does is limits a grocery store to change its prices minute by minute, sort of depending on who's buying the item. It applies to physical supermarkets as well as online delivery platforms. But critics have pointed out that there are certain loopholes. For example, the law only applies to grocery stores and certain online delivery platforms, even though there have been documented examples of stores selling clothing, beauty products, and home goods also using surveillance pricing.
Ira Khan reporting. Now here's a question. When did you last walk past a Gap store? You might not even have noticed it, but there was a time when Gap was one of the coolest places to shop for clothes. It was built by two people, Don and Doris Fisher, and it started, as the best ideas often do, with a moment of frustration. Don couldn't find a pair of jeans that fit, so they opened a store. Now that was in San Francisco back in 1969. Doris came up with the name Gap, a nod to the generation gap and the young shoppers they wanted to reach. She died on Saturday, aged 94. From that one store, they built a business with 3,500 outlets worldwide and brands you still know today, Banana Republic and Old Navy. Here's what Gap sounded like in the 70s.
We've got 1 ton of Levi's just for girls at the Gap. Now fall into the Gap. It's the latest, greatest selection in the world. At the Gap. Now fall into the Gap.
Catherine Shuttleworth is one of the UK's leading retail marketing experts. My colleague Sam Fennick spoke to her about the legacy left behind by the founder of Gap.
This was an unbelievably successful business, a husband and wife business. And she was the merchandiser in the business, so that meant she was responsible for the way things looked, the way things appeared, and importantly for Gap as well, the sort of ethical approach they took to producing goods and how they looked after their staff. So, I mean, without Doris, the business would never have been as successful as it was. And when we look back and you talk about the scale of it, I mean, 3,500 stores across the world, nobody has that anymore, do they?
They essentially sort of invented a template, don't you think? Kind of affordable, aspirational, democratic fashion that everybody wanted to wear.
Exactly. And I think probably a lot of younger people would think, well, haven't retailers always been like that? And not at all. I mean, it didn't used to be democratic at all. A lot of clothing shops were quite snooty. Things were behind counters. And they brought this whole thing to life and brought it into the modern day. And famously, and I think it was about 1985, Michael J. Fox, in one of the Back to the Future films, wore a Gap T-shirt. And that was kind of the peak of it. And then, you know, in when it was the 100th edition of Vogue, the supermodels were on the front looking amazing, but they were all in white Gap shirts and white Gap shorts. It was, of the moment, you know, the brand that everybody in the world was talking about, no matter where you lived. And it's quite interesting about the Gap, because the Gap kind of went off the boil a bit, but right now they're super hot again, because a whole new generation of TikTokers have started a Gap craze where they're looking to buy what they call, it's called the blue and white label. So they look for these vintage items because, of course, it's super cool again. So for Gap, it's got another wind, if you like, really.
Because it did lose its way, didn't it? Gap, as the brand, lost its way. A lot of stores in the UK did close.
They did, and, you know, they had a real point, I think, when fast fashion became a really big thing. People started to wear different things. The last couple of years, they've appointed a new CEO and a new team. They've just done a massive new collaboration with Victoria Beckham, which is giving them good news. And I think they've sort of found their groove again. But all the way through, Doris was there. The family is still very involved in the business.
And a female entrepreneur building a global business in the late 60s, early 70s. How unusual is that? And, you know, does she get the credit, do you think?
Well, maybe not. I think a lot of people wouldn't know the names behind the Gap. But, you know, here's a woman that went to Stanford University and did an economics degree, you know, was born in the 1930s. I mean, that was very unusual to be able to do that. And then she was clearly a lot of the brains behind that organisation. And perhaps today we should remember just what a formidable woman she was and what a great success she made of that business with her husband.
Catherine Shuttleworth speaking to Sam Fennick. As I'm sure most of us are aware, there are plenty of ways to pass the time on the internet. But a new trend sweeping Brazil is definitely among the more unusual. Our reporter Will Chalk has the details.
If you're a WhatsApp user, you may well be in a few group chats. They're full of people telling you things, asking you to do stuff, talking about their days and sharing jokes. It's all well and good, but what about a WhatsApp group with none of that, and instead, just this? If that sounds like an improvement to you, you're not alone. Whistling WhatsApp groups, or grupos de assobio in Portuguese, are proving surprisingly popular in Brazil. The rules are simple. It's you and a bunch of strangers, and the only thing you're allowed to send is a voice note of you whistling. If you break that rule, you're removed. These groups get pretty busy, with some getting hundreds of messages a day, from TV themes to rock songs from more than 20 years ago, to video game music. Many of the best performances end up getting shared on TikTok, where the videos get hundreds of thousands of views and are flooded with comments from people asking to join the group. As with a lot of stuff on the internet, it's not exactly clear where, when or how the trend started, but the earliest TikTok posts are from mid-April. Julian Meyer, a linguist, says that whilst these groups may seem trivial, there's something primal in a desire to communicate through whistling.
The tunes with whistling is very precise for human beings, even more than with the voice. And it can be used for imitating speech, but also for other ways of communication, like these groups.
The internet has seen a lot of trends over the years, so I think it's safe to say the chances of this one sticking around long term are probably slim. Sad for those enjoying these WhatsApp groups, but probably good news for those of us who, through no fault of our own, are unable to whistle ourselves.
Okay, I'll try and put you all out of that misery from that pathetic attempt by our lovely reporter, Will Chalk. And that's all from us for now. If you want to get in touch, you can email us at globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. You can also find us on X at BBC World Service. Use the hashtag #GlobalNewsPod. And don't forget our sister podcast, The Global Story, which goes in depth and beyond the headlines on one big story. This edition of the Global News Podcast was mixed by Alana Bowles, and the producer was Will Chalk. The editor is Karen Martin, and I'm Ankur Desai. Until next time, goodbye.